Hello, Internet. I'm Jackie Fox. Welcome to Politically Non-Binary. And here, coming into 2025, I think one of the most important issues that I can cover that doesn't add to the noise that we see ramping up as people anxiously await the coming of President Trump. I think one of the most important things that I particularly can share with you is my experiences with Buddhism and how they provide a framework for understanding and coping with an over-technologized modern world. In this first video, we'll explore the evolution and basic concepts of Buddhism, its journey to the West, and how it's become more secular over time and its transition to America. Let's dive in. Buddhism began in the 5th century in what is now modern-day Nepal. It was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, who became known as the Buddha after achieving enlightenment. So let's start with the core teachings of Buddhism and how it evolved over time. First to talk about is the Four Noble Truths, which are the foundation of Buddhist teachings. They provide a framework for understanding the nature of suffering, as well as the path to liberation. Let's talk about some of these truths in a little bit more detail. The first noble truth is suffering. It acknowledges that suffering is an inherent part of existence. This doesn't just refer to physical pain, but also mental and emotional struggles that we all face, such as trauma. Birth, aging, illness, and death are all forms of suffering. Even experiences that we would consider pleasurable are impermanent, and therefore can lead to dissatisfaction in their impermanence. The second noble truth identifies the cause of suffering. This truth teaches us that suffering arises from our craving and attachment. Our desires for pleasure, material possessions, and even our attachments to our own ideas and identities can create a cycle of longing and dissatisfaction. This craving leads to suffering because it can never fully be satisfied. The third noble truth is the end of suffering. It states that it's possible to end suffering by eliminating craving and attachment. By letting go of our desires and attachment, we can achieve a state of peace and contentment with our situation. This state is often referred to as nirvana, which means extinguishing the fires of desire and suffering. The fourth noble truth is the path to the end of suffering. This is the Eightfold Path, a practical guide to ethical and mental development. The Eightfold Path consists of 8 interconnected practices that help individuals cultivate wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. By following this path, we can gradually reduce and ultimately eliminate our own suffering. Right understanding is the understanding of the nature of reality and the Four Noble Truths. Right intention is cultivating positive intentions and renouncing harmful desires. Right speech is speaking truthfully, kindly, and without harm to others. Right action is acting ethically and avoiding harmful behaviors. Right livelihood is choosing a livelihood that aligns with ethical principles. Right effort is making a persistent effort to cultivate positive qualities. Right mindfulness is developing awareness of thoughts, feelings, and actions. And finally, right concentration is practicing focused meditation to achieve mental clarity and peace. These Four Noble Truths, and by extension, the Eightfold Path, form the core of Buddhist teachings, no matter what religion they might be manifest through, and provide a path towards a more peaceful and fulfilling life. Buddhism, as I said before, originated in India in the 5th century BCE, emerging alongside and often in response to Hinduism. Now, for us Westerners, Hinduism is very misunderstood because we think of it as being a singular religion with multiple gods, and often it is kind of practiced as a multi-theistic religion, but sometimes it is a monotheistic religion. Because in the diversity of India and the kind of tribal history of what we refer to as Hinduism, there's a lot of separation where in some areas they will worship certain deities, acknowledging or ignoring others, much in the same way that parts of Latin America practice Catholicism not necessarily through a direct relationship with God at all times, but often through the worship of particular saints in particular areas, or saints that are considered to be protectors of certain classes, groups, or even areas of society. Hinduism's multifaceted nature, with its diverse deities, rituals, and philosophies, provided a rich cultural and religious landscape. Buddhism and Hinduism coexisted, with Buddhism initially adopting and reinterpreting many Hindu concepts, such as karma and samsara, or the cycle of rebirth. This coexistence and mutual influence allowed Buddhism to develop a flexible and adaptable nature. As Buddhism spread beyond India, this adaptability enabled it to coexist and integrate with the native religions and cultures it encountered. For example, when Buddhism reached China, it incorporated elements of Confucianism and Taoism, leading to the development of unique schools such as Chan Buddhism. This adaptability made Buddhism more resilient and more appealing to diverse populations. When Buddhism first arrived in Japan in the 6th century CE, which, this would be about 1100 years later, it encountered the indigenous Shinto religion. Shinto, with its focus on nature spirits, kame, ritual purity, blended with Buddhist teachings, leading to the development of a distinct Japanese form of Buddhism. Over time, various Buddhist sects emerged in Japan, each adapting to local customs and beliefs, much like they did in India. One of the most significant developments in Japanese Buddhism was the emergence of Zen Buddhism. Zen, which evolved from the Chinese Chan school, emphasized direct experience and meditation over scholarly study and ritual. This focus on simplicity and mindfulness resonated with Japanese cultural values, particularly those found within samurai culture and traditional arts like tea ceremony and calligraphy. Zen Buddhism's emphasis on meditation, which they call zazen, or sitting zazen, and intuitive insight, kinsho, made it distinct from other forms of Buddhism. It encouraged practitioners to look within themselves for enlightenment, rather than relying on external rituals or texts. This approach, with its focus on personal experience and mindfulness, paved the way for a more accessible and secular interpretation of Buddhist teachings. Zen simplicity and meditation practices set the stage for secular Buddhism, especially in the modern Western context. Later in the 20th century, Buddhism was also evolving in Korea. One of the unique developments was the birth of Won Buddhism in the early 20th century. Founded in 1916, Won Buddhism aimed to modernize and simplify Buddhist practices to make them more accessible to ordinary people. Won Buddhism emphasizes the equality of all beings and the interconnectedness of all phenomena. It incorporates elements of traditional Buddhism but also adapts them to contemporary life. For example, Won Buddhism places a strong emphasis on meditation and ethical living, much like Zen Buddhism, but it also seeks to address social issues and promote social justice. This focus on practical application and social engagement makes Won Buddhism particularly relevant to modern challenges. Won Buddhism's principles include the fourfold grace: gratitude for parents, humanity, nature, and the laws of the universe, and the practice of daily meditation and mindfulness. These practices help encourage individuals to cultivate inner peace and contribute positively to society. In summary, Buddhism's localization in Japan led to the development of Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on meditation and direct experience paving the way for a more secular interpretation of Buddhist teachings. Meanwhile, the birth of Won Buddhism in Korea showed how Buddhist principles could be adapted to address contemporary social issues. Buddhism's journey to the West, though, was not without its challenges. For a long time, Christianity in the West served as an ideological bulwark against Eastern traditions and religions, as they often saw these as being sacrilegious, and had a very strongly developed drive to excise that from their communities. The dominant religious narrative left little room for other faiths and philosophies, you could say. However, it's interesting to note that the Catholic Church, in its historical efforts to incorporate the stories of sanctity, has sainted many Buddhist monks based on tales of Buddhist teachers. These stories were recounted and misunderstood as being about Christian saints or Christian teachers. This highlights the initial resistance, but also the unintended blending of religious narratives, even within Christianity. It's also noted that a lot of Christian historical scholars claim that in the period of time where Jesus is absent from the Bible between his early life and his early 30s, he was likely traveling the world and most likely ended up studying Buddhist philosophy in India. And I find this personally particularly likely because when you consider what Jesus was saying in the early New Testament and just the general tone of the Old Testament, the difference seems to be through the application of really basic Buddhist principles. In the 20th century, particularly in America, Christianity began to exhibit an increasingly xenophobic stance towards other ideologies and belief systems. This period was marked by events like witch hunts.
Just so you understand, it's the single greatest witch hunt in American history, probably in history, but in American history, it's a disgraceful thing.
Indecency trials, where fear of the unknown and different was rampant and persecuted. Around the time I was born, there was also the Satanic Panic, a moral panic characterized by widespread fear about the presence of satanic ritual abuse in small communities. Although this was often barking up the wrong tree because what they would actually consider as satanic could be pretty innocuous.
The kids that I teach are obsessed with Pokemon. I personally think there is a lot of spiritual danger here and have mentioned some of this to the parents, but it's been ignored as innocent fun, entertaining to a kid who doesn't show interest in other things, or as a way of kids connecting with each other.
St. Edward Catholic School in Nashville is facing backlash after the school's pastor pulled the Harry Potter series from the library. In an email to parents, Father Dan Rehill explained that the series glorify acts of conjuring the dead and evil spirits.
Think about non-bread, bread that's frequently served with like Indian or Thai food when you go to a restaurant. The origins of non-bread, go way back to the BC days, and they were developed, in pagan cultures that had, just horrible practices, where non-bread does not today have any spiritual roots tied to it. So I think we can most likely eat non-bread, without any danger of anything. We can even make it in our own home.
Possibly satanic messages on some rock music recordings.
Games like Dungeons and Dragons were luring kids to devil worship. And it got even stranger.
Allegations of physical and sexual abuse of children at a babysitting service.
The dark world of ritualistic child abuse.
There's a widely held opinion that what happened at the daycare was the devil's handiwork.
Father Joseph Breen was the priest at St. Edward's for 33 years. He retired a few years ago, and he too is concerned with the message this sends.
I think we would all say it's a very sad experience. Very unfortunate.
Father Breen worries this is the first step towards intolerance at the school. When he was the priest, he pushed for acceptance.
We had great diversity. I'm not just saying black and white, but people from many different countries.
And prays that the school will continue this appreciation for different people.
A priest who is very welcoming.
And thoughts. Sina Saleem, News Channel 5.
We think of something different that has spiritual roots, something like, I think that we need to be really careful with something like yoga, because the actual positions in which we're placing our bodies during a time of yoga are positions that are used in Hindu worship and are designed to yoke the worshiper with the spiritual being that's being worship. And since, that position is directly connected with yoking oneself to a specific spiritual being, I think there could potentially be a lot of danger there, because the roots, so the Hindu roots of yoga are still in yoga that we have today, where, this bread, this non-bread that was developed, thousands of years ago in pagan cultures, there's none of those pagan roots in the non-bread anymore. So that's something we can say, maybe it didn't have the greatest origins, but those roots aren't still there today. Where something like yoga, yoga didn't have the greatest origins because it's rooted in, Hindu cult worship, but those roots are still there in the positions that are used, which are designed to open us up to the supernatural that has nothing to do with God.
This period also saw the gay panic, where LGBTQ plus rights were vehemently opposed by certain religious groups, and this organization is ongoing to this day against gay rights, and it further highlights the exclusionary and ideologically rigid nature of some Christian communities. Although I have to say, over the last 20 years, accepting Christian communities like the UUC, which honestly kind of reminds me of a pseudo-Christian version of Wan Buddhism that kind of removes some of the meditation, have been more friendly towards the LGBT community, but this wasn't the norm when I was growing up, and it still isn't the norm within the Bible Belt today. By the time Buddhism found me in the 1990s, it was presented as a philosophy that was not mutually exclusive with religion. It was marketed as a secular approach to life, which was particularly, or at least an agnostic one, which was particularly appealing to me as a young queer individual who felt excluded by much of the religious culture in the area I grew up in. The teachings of mindfulness, meditation, and compassion provided a sense of peace and belonging that I hadn't yet found in other religious contexts. Buddhism's flexibility and emphasis on personal experience over dogma allowed it to resonate with many people who were seeking an alternative to the dominant religious narratives. For me, it offered a way to navigate life's challenges with greater clarity and compassion, and without the fear and exclusion that I had experienced elsewhere. Having experienced both secular, to a degree, Zen and Wan Buddhism, I'd like to share some insights into how their practices and services differ, and also compare them to traditional American Christian services. This comparison might help make these practices more relatable for those who are more familiar with Christianity, for better or for worse. Zen Buddhism places a significant emphasis on meditation, specifically zazen, or seated meditation. Unlike many traditional American Christian services where attendees may passively listen to sermons, Zen services often start with a period of mind-clearing meditation. This meditation prepares participants to actively mentally engage with the speaker's words, encouraging a deeper, more personal reflection. It's also so integral to Zen practice that assistance is readily available for newcomers who may need guidance on how to sit zazen properly. In addition to meditation, Zen services often include chanting and mantra recitation. These practices, akin to singing hymns in Christian services, foster a sense of community and shared spiritual experience among members. Chanting and mantras serve to focus the mind and reinforce the teachings, much like hymns reinforce the messages of a Christian sermon, but more in a way like the modern practice of affirmation. Simple, easy to remember recitations and mantras can be a way of generating positive mental thoughts and cultivating a positive mental space in a way that I really don't feel like hymns quite do. Wan Buddhism, on the other hand, integrate modern elements into the traditional Buddhist practices. Services often include meditation and recitation of the Fourfold Grace, expressing gratitude for parents, humanity, nature, and the laws of the universe. This is a communal recitation, and practice of gratitude is similar to the communal prayers and hymns within Christian services as well, but in a kind of a different way. It also reminds me a lot of like UUC, which also has its own sort of set of beliefs, much like the Eightfold Path or the Fourfold Graces. It reinforces a collective sense of belonging and ethical living among participants. Wan Buddhism also places a strong emphasis on the practical application of Buddhist principles in daily life, much like the moral and ethical teachings emphasized in Christian sermons. The focus on social engagement and justice in Wan Buddhism aligns with many Christian communities' efforts to address social issues through charitable work and advocacy, and could be seen similarly. Secular Buddhism strips away much of the religious and ritualistic aspects of traditional Buddhism, instead focusing on mindfulness, meditation, and ethical living. Secular Buddhist gatherings may not follow a set liturgy like Christian services, but often include guided meditations, discussions on how to apply Buddhist principles to everyday life, and reflections on personal experiences. This approach makes Buddhist teachings accessible to those who may not identify with a particular religion, providing a supportive community similar to a church fellowship. To draw a comparison, traditional American Christian services typically include a structured sequence of hymns, prayers, reading from scripture, and a sermon. The focus is often on worship, community, and teaching moral and ethical lessons from the Bible. Hymns and prayers serve to unite the congregation in a shared spiritual experience, again, much like the chanting and mantras that are present in Buddhist practices. One key difference is the role of meditation in Buddhist services, particularly in Zen Buddhism, which tends to emphasize this the most. The practice of mind-clearing meditation, beginning before a speaker, is unique and emphasizes personal introspection and engagement with the teachings. While some Christian traditions incorporate contemplative prayer or even silent reflection, it's not as necessary or central as it is as meditation is within Buddhism, even outside of Zen. In conclusion, while the forms and practices may differ, the core elements of community, shared spiritual experience, and ethical teachings are present in both Buddhist and Christian services. By exploring these different practices, we can gain a deeper appreciation of the diverse way people seek meaning and connection. In our next video, we'll dive deeper into how these Buddhist principles can address modern problems, specifically through the lens of meditation. Now, I think that there's a lot of practicality that is being spread about meditation, particularly like mindfulness meditation has become especially popular recently, but I think that there's also deeper truth to meditation that often gets left out of conversations because it goes just a bit below the surface. So I want to dive into that in the next video and help you understand meditation more fully. So with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, because there is a lot of controversial stuff on this channel. I don't shy away from hitting controversial or maybe even suppressed topics, so ringing the bell makes sure that you'll see my videos, and I greatly appreciate it. Also, if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Patreon or Ko-fi by leaving a one-time or recurring donations. And my name is Jackie Fox, no spaces, underscores, or any of that stuff on both platforms. I greatly appreciate it if you do that. Also, you can check out Jackie Fox on Amazon Books to find my written content. It's all fiction, so if you the top result has, like, for a very long time been a book on, like, recovering from mastectomies, and that I didn't write. But if you see some brightly colored, covered books in fiction, science fiction, fantasy, those types of realms, that is me. That is me. That is this Jackie Fox. And I greatly appreciate if you would support my efforts as an author, as well as my channel. And that is personally, even more so than Patreon or Ko-fi, my favorite way to receive support from the community. So check that out if you can. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching this episode of Politically Non-Binary, and I hope you tune in for the next one.